I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, slavery's biggest secret. My guest on this edition is Ann Farrell. Ann Farrell is a veteran journalist for the Hartford Courant and co-author of Complicity: How the North Promoted, Prolonged, and Profited from Slavery. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
Congratulations on your new and important book.
Thank you so much.
Let me ask you that question. How did the North profit from slavery?
Completely and in every way. I grew up in New England believing that slavery in the North was, if it existed at all, was very long ago, not economically significant, and very limited. What my co-authors and I discovered in the course of doing our research is that there were tens of thousands of captive people in the North, and that they were worked brutally and for a very long time, and that the great foundation of our wealth grew from industries and businesses and farms fueled and dependent upon enslaved people.
Now, when we use the term New England, does that have any particular significance with regard to the subject matter of your book?
Well, very much so. Of the in the international slave trade, which existed for about 400 years, the English were the great leaders. Of the 27,000 or so documented slaving voyages, and I don't think that's the whole number, I think there's more to learn, England was at the helm of about 10,000 of those. As an English colony, we fell quite naturally and took to it with some enthusiasm, the slave trade ourselves. New England men were on the coast of Africa beginning in, we are quite certain, about 1660, and they may have been there even before that. They were capturing people and taking them to the Caribbean, where they were literally worked to death on sugar plantations. They were also brought back to New England, and in greater numbers, they were brought to the American southern colonies. I think that was one of the first aha moments for us, seeing that many of the enslaved people in the South were taken there on ships from the North.
Now, in the coast of Africa, you're referring to the West Coast.
Yes, that's right.
And principally, the countries we know today would be Ghana.
Yes.
And that would be the slave coast. They had three coasts there, didn't they?
They did. They did.
What were they?
Well, there was the Gold Coast and the Slave Coast and the Rice Coast. There was
and the Slave Coast.
Yes, and the slaving operations were working all of those coasts. One of the important things that we learned, and that maybe others had already known, is that shipbuilding, seamanship, these things were immensely important to New Englanders, and our skill at building boats and at sailing them took us out into the world for various kinds of trade enterprise. Exactly.
The Yankee Clipper was the world.
Right. We were very good at it, and from very early on, we were on the coast of Africa buying people and selling them in various locations.
Well, now, we're going to get into a lot of the details, but the broad strokes are the average person in America and the world is, I venture to guess, of the strong opinion that slavery in the United States was, this peculiar institution, was indigenously and endemic only in the southern part of the country.
Right.
You're saying that that's revisionist history, that after the Civil War, that history was written.
Absolutely. You know, Tony, my co-authors and I are all New Englanders. I think if we had thought about how many captive people there were in New England, we would have said 800. We discovered that in New York, New Jersey, and the New England states, at the very height of its population, at the very height of the captive population, there were 41,000 enslaved people. If you look at, for instance, early Manhattan, from the 1720s on, when, you know, the population was between 7,000 and 10,000, a fifth of those people were captives. In 1741, at the time of a major slave rebellion, enslaved black men were 1/3 of the workforce. They were doing the work.
This is New York.
Yes.
New York State or New York City?
New York City. But what was true there was true throughout the northern states. You know, several times I've been asked, what did the slaves do? They did all the work of building the colony. They were blacksmiths, they were shipwrights, they were farmers, they were bakers, they were skilled workmen, they built furniture. They did all the work of the New World. They just didn't own their labor.
Tell us about Rhode Island. Little, small Rhode Island.
The ocean state.
Yes.
What
was its role in the slave trade?
It was huge. Rhode Island was at the very epicenter of the colonial slave trade. Of the documented slaving voyages made by colonial American ships, Rhode Island men were at the helm of about 90% of them.
My goodness.
We know of at least 1,000 voyages, and I think there are more to be discovered.
You said 90%?
Yes, that's right.
Came from Rhode Island?
Yes, that's right. That's right. If you look at the Charleston customs records, for instance, in Charleston, South Carolina, you see, beginning in the early 18th century, you see Rhode Island ships every single week, and many of them.
Now, there was a man you have in your book, was it Venture Smith?
Yes.
Who went to South Carolina.
Exactly.
And tell us what he did when he went there.
Well, Venture actually was captured, we believe, from someplace in Ghana.
No, I don't mean the slave. There was a Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Russell.
Nathaniel.
Yes.
He was a white man.
Yes, from Rhode Island.
From Rhode Island. Yeah, tell us. Yeah.
Yes, a very interesting story and very typical of the time. He was the son of a Supreme Court justice in Rhode Island, and in 1765, young Nathaniel went south to make his fortune. We know that by 1769 he owned captive people, that he was selling slaves in Charleston, that he owned ships that were going to Africa. By the very end of the 18th century, he was considered one of the richest men in town, and he built a great ship. He built a great house on Meeting Street in Charleston and became the center of a culture of New Englanders who were also successful Southern slave traders.
And that name of that association, was it the Rhode Island Association of Charleston?
It was the New England, forgive me, it had New England in the title,
yes,
and
yes.
It was a social and fraternal society, basically for these men who were slave traders.